planning reform, drink spiking, railway nationalisation, counter-terrorism. Just some of the issues expected to be covered in the King's speech today. The speech formally opens Parliament and basically outlines what this new government wants to achieve in its first months in office.
So what can we expect? We're joined now by Minister for the Cabinet Office, Pat McFadden. Morning to you. A big day ahead. This is where the new Labour government gets to set its stall out for its priorities for the year ahead. What can we expect to hear?
Well, good morning. I'm in the slightly odd position of not being able to talk much about the individual bills until the King makes the speech later on this morning. But I think what people should expect, what your viewers should expect, is for us to get on with implementing the things that were in our manifesto and the things that we talked about during the election campaign. And we said we'd put economic growth at the heart of what we wanted to do if we won the election. We said we wanted to take measures to improve transport. We said we wanted to get on with the transition to cleaner energy. We said we wanted to devolve more powers to local areas, to our elected mayors around the country. So those are the kind of things that people can look out for and expect when the King's speech comes later today. OK,
I appreciate you can't go into detail too much, but people at home watching will want to know, how does this affect me? So starting with rail, for example, I just looked up taking the kids to London in August, 327 quid for a family return. And the last time we did that, we ended up sitting on the floor. So can you put a vague timeline on nationalised railways getting cheaper and more reliable?
Well, what we want to do here is, as the franchises for the individual railways come to an end, to bring them into public ownership, to create a more integrated system, to simplify the ticketing, to make sure there's more interconnection between the different services and different companies, and to give ourselves a more reliable rail network, rail service, which is there for everybody to use. We think it's too fragmented, too unreliable, and we want to do something about that.
And how quickly will we get those results on price and reliability?
Well, it depends on the length of the franchises, because some of them have, last for longer periods than others. So as they come to an end, the idea is to bring those back into public ownership.
That ties into your plans around devolution, doesn't it? Because we know that there's been more investment in transport in London and the South East than there has in the North, and trains are less reliable up north. So within that, is there a greater commitment to change that?
Yes, indeed. And one of the first things that the new Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, did in the few days after the election was to invite in all the elected mayors from around the country into Downing Street to talk about how we could work together. And transport was very high on the list of their agenda. Transport, housing, skills and so on. They have great insight into what's needed in their area, and we're looking forward to a really good partnership with the mayors to deliver some of this change. You want good transport services, not just in the capital city, but right around the country. And that's been a running sore for a long time. And so I think we've got the basis of a really positive partnership to do something about that over the next few years.
Yeah, people do feel a bit fed up with the wait on transport connectivity in the north. Let's talk about building. There's a big plan that will come from Whitehall. You said you want to remove the local blockages in terms of getting spades in the ground. How does that tie into your agenda in terms of giving power to the regions?
Well, they want it too. It's really interesting. When we met with the mayors, they weren't sitting there saying, "Oh, we don't want new housing in our area." The very opposite. So again, I think it can be a good partnership. And I know these things can be controversial. Of course they can. But the truth is, it takes too long to get things built in the UK. And I'm not just talking about housing. I'm talking about things like data labs, or big factories, or the development of the critical infrastructure that we need around our power grid and so on. These things can take far too long at the moment. And remember, there are also a generation, or there is a generation of young people who are wondering, when am I going to get the chance to have a home of my own, either for rent or for purchase? That we used to think was a very, achievable aspiration for the British people, it's become a less achievable aspiration in recent years. We want to make it more achievable, and to do that, we're going to have to build more houses than we have in recent years.
But it's one thing having devolved Labour mayors on side, but is there a danger that in some areas you're going to have local authorities and local planners feeling like London is bulldozing their way through their local agenda?
Well, look, we want local authorities to identify the areas needed for housing. We think they can do that. We look forward to working with them to do that. But in the end, we have to make it easier to get things built in the UK, because if we did nothing about this and we just stick with where we are at the moment, then nothing will change. And we weren't elected on a platform for changing nothing. The very opposite. The word change was on our manifesto, and this is one of the changes that we talked about. We were very open about. There should be no surprises about this. It was something we talked about quite a lot during the election, and something which you'll see reflected in what we want to do.
What will also be noted, Mr McFadden, is what's not in there. So we know at the moment that a quarter of children in the UK are living in poverty. Yesterday we talked about Bernardo's statistic that more than 1 in 10 kids do not have a bed to sleep in tonight. If I was a parent with 3 children living on benefits, I would be wanting to hear something about the child benefit cap. What would be in today's speech for me?
Well, the King's Speech is about implementing what we said we'd do. People shouldn't expect it to implement the things that we didn't say we'd do. And on that issue, like on many other issues where there might be a good case, we said throughout the election that we would have to take the economic inheritance that we have got, and that we wouldn't come forward with things if we couldn't say how they were going to be paid for. We shouldn't expect a different answer from Labour 2 weeks after the election on this to the one that we gave 2 weeks before the election.
To be clear,
to
be clear, you're not in a fiscal position to lift that cap.
Well, we said this during the election. It's really important that the viewers who watched interviews with politicians like me when we were asked this before the election get the same answer after the election as they did before. This is not something we promised to do during the election, and I was personally asked about it quite a lot, as were many of my colleagues during the election. So what people should expect in the King's Speech is the implementation of things we said we would do, not the implementation of things that we said we wouldn't do.
People might be watching, though, and saying, you are the Labour Party. It's time to have that big conversation about poverty, but also around public sector pay. Doctors' pay is 15% lower than it was in 2010. What's the plan going forward to deal with that?
Look, we'll get reports from pay review bodies about public sector pay. We'll make our response to those in the coming weeks. We understand the pressures. I want people who do a good job for us, whether it's doctors, nurses, teachers, any public servant, to get a fair pay rise, to get a fair pay settlement. But like everything else, we also have to look at the broad public spending picture, and we've inherited a situation which is the toughest of any government in living memory. So these decisions are not easy. You have to take everything in the round, and that's what we'll do when we respond to the recommendations from the pay review bodies that recommend the pay rates for the public sector.
OK, we wait to hear the outcome of the King's Speech, which takes place later this morning. Pat McFadden, Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you.